So, winter is approaching, and the EU is once again freaking out. As the West attempts to isolate Russia from Putin, he is launching his own counter-move to cripple Europe's economies. Once again, Russian energy is key to this. This may surprise you, but the EU continues to rely on Russian oil and gas imports for survival. Yes, despite the bluster, the EU continued to buy nearly $1 billion per month of fossil resources from Putin last year. It is significantly reduced, yet it remains a key source of money for Russia. Natural gas alone exemplifies hypocrisy and reliance. The EU imported 13 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia. That is far more than US LNG and substantially doubles the UK's gas supply. Russia accounts for over 20% of Europe's supply overall. The remainder of the supply is derived from costlier sources, namely LNG. This represents 25% of the bloc's energy supply. Why do you believe they are deindustrializing? If Putin decides to weaponize natural gas, it will harm the EU economy. The layoffs at Volkswagen would only be the beginning of a far worse situation in which other major industries would collapse. Now, Europe requires Russian gas, but they are playing hardball. They do not want to pay for gas supply, so it is not surprising that Russia switched off the tariff. Gazprom, Russia's gas provider, shut off supplies to Austria 2 days ago. This is devastating for Austria, which relies on Russian energy for more than 90% of its needs. The longer this interruption lasts, the more pain the country will suffer. Von der Leyen, of course, is panicking. According to Brussels, Putin is attempting to blackmail Austria and Europe. He is using energy as a weapon to corner the Europeans. What's remarkable is her claim that Europe is prepared for this. The EU's gas storage capacity is full, and the bloc will not freeze as a result of Russia's supply cuts. However, we must investigate her allegation to see why she is incorrect. If Russia genuinely cuts off gas supplies, Europe is still unprepared. There will be significant economic harm among the member nations. Looking at gas storage levels in Europe, the EU's big economies are likely to be all right. Their storage capacity has never been higher. Germany has 96% storage capacity, France 92%, and Italy 97%. So they will not freeze in the winter, and there will be enough energy for heating and lighting. Ukraine is the only country that is at high risk of being cut off. Their stockpile is only at 26%, which indicates how bad the situation is on the front lines. The issue with the storage argument is Europe's current gas demand. First and foremost, you will need to refill the storage sooner or later. You cannot drain everything. When it comes time to refill, there is no assurance that pricing will be lower tomorrow than today. There's also the significant matter of replacing the Russian supply. Von der Leyen has made it quite obvious that the #1 alternative, at the top of her list, is US LNG. She wishes to replace cheap gasoline with liquid petroleum halfway around the world, across the Atlantic Ocean. It's the entire topic of LNG.
We still get a lot of LNG via Russia, from Russia. And why not replace it by American LNG, which is cheaper for us and brings down our energy prices, but is something where we can get into a discussion, also what our trade deficit is concerned. So engage, look at common interest, and then negotiate.
Now, I'm not sure how US LNG can be cheaper than Russian supplies, which are right next door. If you substitute pipeline gas from Russia with LNG from the United States, you will pay more. While the United States is the world's largest supplier of natural gas, LNG is extremely inefficient. You are purposefully stretching the supply chain with extremely expensive vessels. LNG delivered to Europe can cost nearly 4 times more than domestic U.S. rates, implying that the EU might wind up paying 30 to 40% more for U.S. gas supplies than Russia. It just doesn't make sense here. Remember the terrible plight of EU industries? Automakers are crumbling. Germany intends to develop its own semiconductor industries, but this will not work. There's a reason why businesses like BYD and Intel have paused their EU growth ambitions. You can no longer manufacture there competitively because the energy costs are simply too high. However, the origins of the Austrian gas shutdown are exceedingly unusual. So here's what happened. Austria's National Energy Corporation, OMV, sued Gazprom for unmet supplies to its German unit. Austria planned to recoup $240 million in damages by not paying Russia for part of its gas supply, thus receiving free gas to balance the claims. Of course, Gazprom does not want to play this game, so they cut off supply to Austria, which may be considered a self-inflicted wound by the EU. This is the chain of events, and when you think about it, you realize how silly it is, and Austria is now scrambling to replace its massive reliance on Russian energy. Drawing down their savings is not a long-term answer in this situation. Almost immediately, the price of EU gas rose by 3%, reaching its highest level in a year. Everyone is aware that Europe is in turmoil. Therefore, worldwide suppliers will take their pound of flesh, raising prices even higher. This just reinforces Europe's deindustrialization. Trying to eliminate inexpensive energy is untenable, especially as a U.S. trade war approaches and China's industries continue to gain market dominance. We only need to examine the case more attentively. Even though Gazprom has cut off Austria, additional EU purchasers are lined up for Russian supplies. They are stepping in to grab more Russian gas for themselves, and this is likely what they are taking. We'll take the gas intended for Austria for our own economies, or we'll buy it first and resell it to Austria at a higher price. And this is essentially how global supply networks operate. Even if you cut off one customer, there will still be plenty of demand throughout the world. Gas is not a luxury product. It is a commodity that countries require to operate their businesses. But first, let's look at the semiconductor conflict, which is quite intriguing, and then we'll journey all the way to Taiwan, where something significant is occurring. Although Trump won the election, Biden will remain president until 2025. So the same actors, Blinken, Sullivan, and Raimondo, are still in charge. Don't forget that. And the chip battle with China has reached a perilous tipping point. Because of U.S. sanctions, TSMC, the world's largest chip maker, is compelled to blacklist China. TSMC is discontinuing the manufacture of AI processors for Beijing. They are cooperating with the Americans by limiting China's access to modern semiconductors, and it appears that when the U.S. orders you to leap, you have to ask how high. The business informed their Chinese clients that they would no longer make AI chips measuring 7 nanometers or less. As of last week, Chinese orders were no longer produced in TSMC. Future supply of such chips will be subject to permission, which will most likely involve Washington and the Trump administration. And, based on Trump's cabinet roster, including Marco Rubio, we may conclude that China's containment is far from over. It is still the game plan. In the short term, this creates a difficult situation for Chinese technology. You have several Chinese corporations, like Alibaba, that rely on TSMC's manufacture. They create the designs and transmit them to Taiwan, where the chips are manufactured. As a result, part of China's AI advances will be stalled. We've heard several times that Beijing is much behind the curve when it comes to modern semiconductors. However, there is no smoke without fire. There's a reason Biden is targeting global supply networks to China. The Blair Institute created this graphic showing the server installation base by nation. How many servers does each country have installed? And it turns out that there are two clear leads. First, the United States is far ahead of the pack. Second, China is definitely in second place, but also far ahead of the others. And, based on these figures, it's no surprise that two countries are dictating the terms of the race to develop AI systems. These are the countries with access to the massive amounts of processing power required to train AI systems. And these are the nations that are now battling for access to cutting-edge semiconductors that will help develop AI training. This is why the United States is terrified of China. According to Chris Miller, author of The Chip Wars, China is the second most advanced country in the AI technology race. It is critical to understand that the immediate consequences of the Taiwan embargo will compel China to double down and expedite the development of AI chips. This will eventually lead to disengagement from TSMC and increased dissociation from China. The business plans to become the primary supplier of chips to the West. In the third quarter, 11% of TSMC's revenue came from China. It's a large sum of money that's now at risk. We should anticipate this to decrease further if the U.S. continues to restrict Taiwanese shipments to China. The U.S. strategy has always been to preserve a technological advantage, isolate China from global supply networks, and put Beijing a few generations behind in semiconductors. Now, the stakes are really high. The West is concerned about China taking over the semiconductor sectors, like they did with electric automobiles. In the first quarter of last year, TSMC generated about $17 billion in sales, accounting for nearly 70% of worldwide foundry chip profitability. In comparison, China contributes only 7%, or around $1.7 billion. But they're not far behind the United States either. EMD, NVIDIA, and Apple all rely on TSMC for chip manufacture, which costs far more per unit than older processors. To compete in this market, Beijing must go up the value chain. And Chinese engineers work really hard. They and their army of experts are making advances in sophisticated chip fabrication. SMEE, which manufactures chip-making equipment, has filed a patent for EUV, or extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. It's a significant step toward catching up with industry heavyweights, such as ASML. China is presently trapped at the 28 nanometer level of production, but if this patent is accepted and works, China will be able to quickly progress to 7 nanometer chips or better. We know that China has economies of scale. When they develop sophisticated AI processors, the West will be out of luck. Even TSMC might be in peril. They'll be in exactly the same situation that Volkswagen is now. Chinese chip foundries will rush in and cut production costs. They will flood the world with low-cost AI processors, capturing market share. In modern conflict, quantity has acquired a distinct quality. What China lacks now, it has enough people to move the ball ahead. Global chip patent applications have increased by 22%, reaching 81,000. However, China is now winning the patent race. They have submitted over 46,000 patents, representing a 42% increase from the previous year. Over half of new semiconductor concepts are coming from China, which should be highly concerning to the United States. Drilling further into the numbers, we notice a worrying trend emerging. Just 4 years ago, the United States and China were on equal footing in terms of patent applications. But now, Chinese engineers are funding twice as many semiconductor concepts as their American counterparts. With Trump back in office, he may simply abolish the CHIPS Act. He might just disregard Biden's proposal and strategy. As a result, Beijing's research and development efforts might accelerate even more. So, it's just a matter of time before China creates its own powerful chips. The TSMC ban will undoubtedly hurt, but the consequences will be just as terrible. Chinese enterprises will develop quicker and harder. But tell me what you think. Can Europe ever break its dependence on Russian gas? Can China close the gap to win the chip war? Please let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, like, and subscribe as we traverse these tumultuous times.